Everybody, clap your hands! That's right, it's time for another episode of Juni Taisen. The Zodiac War continues in this episode, and there are two major casualties. That's right, two of the Juni Taisen competitors go down in this episode, which means we are down to the final six, so everybody who's watching this at home can start placing their bets on who they think is going to win. I honestly can't predict it at this point, but that's only because the show itself is pretty unpredictable. In fact, I would say one of the best things about this episode is that two of the major fights involved characters who completely underestimated their opponents. They thought they had the upper hand, they thought they were smarter, but they end up getting tricked. And both moments were surprisingly shocking, one more than the other, but we'll get to that in a second. I also really liked that half of this episode was dedicated to the horse. We finally get to learn a little bit more about his backstory, and believe it or not, it has a lot in common with Captain America. But before we get to that, let's talk about some of the crazy, shocking things from this episode, and as always, a spoiler warning if you have not seen it. So, let's just get this one out in the open. Rabbit killed Monkey. Just out of freaking nowhere, and it was so clever how it was handled. They've been battling for the last couple of episodes, and for the most part it is more of the same, aside that we get a lot of really great fighting choreography out of these two. But basically Monkey feels that she has the upper hand, she can read her opponent, she feels that she is superior in combat. And there is a scene where eventually the two get separated and they're inside of a park, and she feels that she's going to get the upper hand on him by doing this weird, crazy acrobatic flip. She jumps over him, she's getting ready to subdue him, when suddenly, boom! Both of those giant machete blades get freaking embedded right into her chest. And that's because he immediately threw them backward as she was jumping back. Now, how is he able to pull this off if he's not as great of a fighter as Monkey is? Well, that's because even though he's not as great of a fighter, he is very clever and has a lot of tricks up his sleeve, like taking the head of the decapitated snake and putting it up in a tree so that he can utilize its vision to know where she's attacking from multiple angles. As a necromantis, apparently we learn in this episode that what his weird, freaky zombie sees, he sees too. They're all connected in their vision, and this was a pretty freaking shocking moment, to say the least. Now, while I do believe that Monkey probably was killed in this episode, there is the possibility that she will live. They make it clear halfway through the episode that there's only like 6 opponents left, but there's still not a lot of conclusion to her actual death, and I feel like there's just more to it. Like, I can't believe how abrupt it is. Maybe that's why it's so shocking, because it just comes out of nowhere, and from a way that I couldn't even have possibly expected. I mean, did anybody see anyone carrying Snake's head around, and yet he still had time to put it in the tree? Maybe he had a bird fly the head across the city and put it in a tree. Can you imagine seeing that? How freaking crazy that was? All I know is this moment was really shocking, and I really can't wait to see where it's all going to be headed, as Rabbit really does seem like one of the most unpredictable characters in the series. And if it even came down to just him and Ox fighting, I think it would be one of the coolest things that I've ever seen. The other big shocking moment is one that picks up from last week's episode, where we just got done learning about Sheep's backstory, and he's just been confronted by Tiger, who is an absolute drunk. Not only is she dressed in one of the most scantily clad and ridiculous looking costumes, but her facial expressions when she is drunk has got to be one of the funniest things that I've seen from the series. That, and just like the battle with Rabbit, Sheep seems to completely just underestimate his opponent, and apparently she's drunk for a reason. That's because she's a master of the drunken fist, which is a very classic technique that's been seen in a lot of martial arts movies and anime before. Rock Lee from Naruto used it, and she uses it to a degree that I've never seen before. She basically just moves incredibly fast, and she just defeats Sheep in a super violent fashion. He falls over, he's bleeding out, and that's pretty much it right there. Just like Monkey, however, I have a feeling that he might not be fully dead. I'm not sure why I'm feeling that, but it's just very different than the other deaths that we actually saw from the series, which were certainly a lot more conclusive, such as Boar getting completely just cutting right down her chest, or even the scene where the chicken freaking had a giant sword shoved right through her face. Like, this is not as conclusive as those, and I'd like to see where it's going, and apparently the tiger chick is pretty freaking strong, so I can't wait to see more from her and see what her overall motivations are going to be, and of course her eventual backstory. Speaking of backstory, though, that brings us to the second half of the episode, which is all about the horse, who is basically just hiding it out. That's basically his overall plan. He's just going to try and wait things out, not have to fight against Ox or any of the other opponents, and maybe his special ability will actually nullify the poison which is in his body. And we get to learn a little bit more about his ability Stirrup in this episode. There's a whole flashback sequence about him being this former soldier, and there's this action sequence where he's hanging out in this jungle, and he's like one of the last members of his team that's just been taken out. And he just goes around solid snaking everybody, just being so incredibly freaking awesome. And the choreography here all looks great, and he's confronted by this one opponent who's wearing this crazy bodysuit which like inflates, and it allows him to like move around super fast. And they have this battle sequence which reminds me that, man, this series is doing some great things with its fighting choreography. It could look better, though. I know that's like being really nitpicky. The movements and everything and the overall like choreography itself looks really awesome and super fast, but there are moments where the artwork does not really match very well with the animation, and it's not like a perfect marriage. But for the most part, that scene was definitely one of my favorite things from this episode right here, and I wish we got to spend a little more time in the jungle, to be perfectly honest. But he ends up actually losing to this opponent, and he's basically defeated entirely by his weakness, so he decides to give himself to science, where all of these scientists experiment on him little by little, transforming him into the ultimate super soldier, giving him drugs and serums and testing his power and making him do all sorts of ridiculous things, to the point where eventually he awakens the hidden ability within himself, Stirrup, which allows him to create the ultimate defense, which theoretically should be able to get rid of the poison inside of his body, but this is not known for sure. And then the episode ends with a nice little cliffhanger, with Rat suddenly appearing where he is. He's in the middle of this, like, vault, which is underneath this bank, which is just completely sealed off, which admittedly is a really great hiding place, but it could also end up biting you in the ass in the long run. And the Rat basically gives him this little pep talk, basically acknowledging that if he's just going to continue to sit here and do nothing, then he might as well be dead in the first place. That's the horrifying thing about this episode, is how philosophical the Rat gets during this scene, saying if people just sort of stood around and did nothing all the time, then it would just be a dead world. And honestly, he does have a point. And he's also continuing to make me think there is something weird about this Rat kid who always manages to escape, never seems to get hurt, interacts with all sorts of characters, giving out weird sage advice and disappearing like a freaking ninja. It makes no sense how he's able to do this stuff. He claims he's a rat and he can just crawl through things, but how did he get through there? Is this some sort of special ability that he has to teleport or do something crazy that allows him to almost become, let's say, intangible so that he can't actually become damaged? Like, really, what is the deal with this character? And I want to learn more. But as he leaves, the headless snake, who continues to run around the entire episode, which still looks really funny to me, decides to find the horse, and he starts just destroying the place with his freaking flamethrower. And the episode ends with Horse presumably getting knocked out by the smoke and not being able to escape. What is next for Juni Taisen? We'll just have to wait and see. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Juni Taisen? This one right here I think was really solid. I think it lacked focus a little bit in the story that I was trying to tell, but honestly, the whole series has been like that, with how quickly they just jump around from character to character. I didn't even talk about the scenes with Ox, who's basically analyzing the escape that Sheep made. He's completely trying to find him and run all over the city, and he even uses his, like, detective skills to learn where he is, like acknowledging that there's a car that has a dent on it, so he realizes the sheep probably jumped on that and is just sort of like Narutoing his way across the city right now. Maybe this is going to lead him to Tiger, however, which is going to lead to a very interesting fight. What if the Tiger actually is the character who could trip up the Ox? What if he's never dealt with someone who could use the abilities that she's used before? Like I said, the series is really unpredictable, and they could do some crazy things with it just like that. Speaking of that, like, the death of Monkey and Sheep in this episode, just, man, like, it's been a while since we've had a couple character deaths in the series, so I felt that they basically, like, alright, we know we've been late to the party a little bit, let's just kill off two characters right here. Boom! That's pretty much it. Still, like, I was really kind of hoping that moment that Monkey would actually be able to take down Rabbit, but after the kills that he's had in the series and how many people that he's actually taken down at this point, he might actually take this, which is pretty freaking crazy. So I can't wait to see more of his character, as ever since the first episode of the series, to me, he's already sort of felt like kind of like the mascot of the series. The face of Juni Taisen, if you will, if not a very creepy and disturbing one. So this was a good episode with lots of shocks, lots of action, lots of humor from Tiger, and of course the backstory of Horse, and we don't even know how his story is going to end yet. Really, there's a lot of mystery to see how this series is going to end, and I can't wait to see how it's going to play out. This episode had some pretty good production value, but it looked in some places, so I am going to give this episode a 4 out of 5. A solid addition to the series, which will definitely be pleasing to the eyes, especially for those who are looking for some solid anime action. So there it is. That's my review. I'd love to hear from you guys. Tell me your thoughts about this episode in the comments section below. Who do you think is going to win the Juni Taisen? And make sure to subscribe to the channel. Leave me a like. I'll see you guys next time. And as always, stay dandy, baby.